I sat at the back table near the kitchen doors, watching servers parade past with platinum-rimmed plates of filet mignon and butter-poached lobster for every guest except me. My plate held something that looked like it had been scraped from yesterday's banquet, reheated, and presented without apology. Around me, 200 wedding guests celebrated my sister's fairytale moment while I picked at cold chicken that tasted like humiliation. Then everything changed. The groom, all polished charm in his custom tuxedo, worked the room with his best man, thanking guests at each table. When he reached mine, his professional smile froze mid-expression. His face went pale. "Ms. Martinez," he stammered, his voice cracking with confusion. "What are you doing back here? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The music seemed to fade. Conversations at nearby tables stopped. My sister Ashley, radiant in her $10,000 gown, turned sharply from across the reception hall. Our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her carefully constructed world. Pure panic. "I'm sorry," Michael continued, his confusion giving way to visible distress. "There must be some terrible mistake. Why is the senior vice president of operations sitting at the service table? You see, my future brother-in-law didn't know he was marrying my sister." Ashley had been very careful about that detail. And what happened next would unravel far more than just one wedding reception. My name is Jennifer Martinez, though everyone at Tech Vision Solutions calls me Jen. At 34, I've spent 12 years building a career most people in Portland's tech scene consider remarkable. I started as a junior analyst fresh out of state college with student loans that felt like anchors and a determination that my mother called unladylike. I worked 70-hour weeks, earned my MBA at night, and climbed every rung of the corporate ladder through merit alone. No connections, no shortcuts, just relentless competence and a refusal to accept that boardrooms weren't places for women who came from nothing. Tech Vision Solutions wasn't some startup fairy tale. It was an established player in supply chain optimization software, the kind of company that kept the global economy running smoothly behind the scenes. Unsexy work that required precision, strategy, and the ability to manage complex operations across continents. When I was promoted to senior vice president 3 years ago, I became the youngest person and only the second woman to hold an executive position in the company's 40-year history. My corner office on the 23rd floor overlooked the Willamette River, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a view I'd earned through sacrifice and skill. The Pearl District loft I called home reflected that same intentionality. Exposed brick and industrial beams softened by carefully chosen furniture, a workspace where I could think, a kitchen I actually used despite my schedule, and most importantly, silence. Beautiful, complete silence where nobody made demands, questioned my choices, or reminded me that family was supposed to come before ambition. I'd learned early that peace had a price tag, and I was willing to pay it. My relationship with my family had always been complicated in the way that families are when success becomes a wedge rather than a celebration. My father left when I was 6, disappearing into a series of failed businesses and empty promises until he became more myth than memory. My mother Carol remarried when I was 9 to Robert Chen, a middle manager at an insurance company who brought stability, suburban comfort, and a very specific vision of how women should behave. Grateful, accommodating, focused on family rather than career, preferably married to someone who made the real decisions. I didn't fit that vision. I never had. Where my mother learned to soften her opinions and defer to Bob's judgments, I learned to trust my own instincts and fight for my worth. This made me difficult in their eyes, stubborn, too independent, too willing to challenge Bob when he made pronouncements about women's roles or appropriate ambitions. Our house in Beaverton had been comfortable but conditional, love measured by compliance. When Ashley was born 2 years after the marriage, I was 11 and already marked as the problem child. She arrived like a reset button for our blended family, a fresh start who would surely turn out better than her complicated older sister. Ashley grew up watching me leave for early classes and late shifts, observing my exhaustion and stress, and learning a very different lesson than my mother intended. Where Mom hoped Ashley would see the value of hard work, my sister instead concluded that struggle was for suckers. Why exhaust yourself climbing when you could charm your way to the top? Why build something slowly when you could attach yourself to someone who'd already succeeded? She inherited our mother's delicate features and her talent for reading what people wanted to hear, but she added something uniquely her own. A gift for crafting narratives where she was always the victim of circumstances beyond her control and other people's advantages. By the time Ashley turned 16, I was 27 and thriving in my career. I'd return home for obligatory holidays to find her treating our parents' house like a hotel, skipping community college classes, cycling through retail jobs she'd quit the moment a manager criticized her. Bob made excuses. "She's finding herself," he'd say over Thanksgiving dinner while Ashley scrolled through her phone instead of helping clean up. "She doesn't need to break her back like some people," his eyes sliding to me with thinly veiled disapproval. "She'll marry someone who appreciates her softness." Our mother would nod along, having long ago accepted that challenging Bob meant disrupting the peace she'd worked so hard to maintain. I stopped coming home as frequently after that. Birthdays became phone calls. Holidays became every other year obligations. I sent generous checks for Christmas and Ashley's birthdays, money that was accepted without gratitude because in their minds, I had so much and they had so little. The fact that I'd earned every dollar through sacrifice didn't register. Success, in their worldview, was something that happened to lucky people, not something built through deliberate choice and persistent effort. Ashley's 20s were a carousel of false starts and borrowed credibility. She tried her hand at event planning after attending a friend's wedding, using my name to book initial consultations before clients realized she had no training or follow-through. That venture collapsed within 6 months, leaving 2 angry brides and a small claims court judgment I quietly settled to protect my own reputation. Then came a stint selling nutritional supplements through a multi-level marketing scheme, where she spammed every contact in her phone, including my professional colleagues, until I had to explicitly tell her to stop. She dabbled in real estate licensing but never passed the exam. She started a lifestyle blog that generated exactly 43 followers before she abandoned it. Each failure was accompanied by elaborate explanations about unfair advantages other people had, systems rigged against her, bad timing, and unsupportive family members who didn't believe in her vision. What Ashley excelled at was presentation. Her Instagram feed was a carefully curated fantasy of brunch dates, boutique shopping trips, and inspirational quotes about manifesting abundance. She had a gift for making life look effortless and expensive, even when she was living in our parents' basement and borrowing money for those boutique purchases she'd return the next week. Her photos suggested a life of leisure and taste, attracting followers who didn't realize they were watching a performance funded by credit cards and parental enablement. When she started dating Michael Thompson 2 years ago, I barely paid attention. Ashley's relationships followed a pattern. Intense initial infatuation, rapid escalation, then inevitable drama when the man realized she expected him to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford or grew tired of her constant need for validation and financial support. I'd met a parade of boyfriends at awkward family dinners, each one seemingly nice enough until Ashley's demands exceeded his patience. I assumed Michael would be another brief chapter in her romantic resume. What I didn't know, what Ashley very carefully concealed, was that Michael worked at Tech Vision Solutions. He was a project manager in the client services division, 3 levels below my executive position. We operated in different spheres of the company. I dealt with strategic operations and vendor relationships while he managed day-to-day client implementations. Our paths rarely crossed in a building that housed over 800 employees across 5 floors. When they did intersect during all-hands meetings or company events, we were strangers in a crowd, just another face in the corporate landscape. Ashley had always been vague about Michael's work. "He's in tech," she'd say when Mom asked, "doing something with computers and clients." The deliberate vagueness should have raised questions, but I'd learned to tune out most of what my sister said. Her life was her business, and I'd built enough distance to insulate myself from her chaos. When the engagement announcement came last Christmas, I'd sent a congratulatory text and a generous check, assuming I'd met Michael eventually at some obligatory family gathering. I certainly never imagined I'd meet him for the first time at his wedding to my sister while being served reheated leftovers at a table near the kitchen. The engagement period had been mercifully low contact from my perspective. Ashley sent occasional group texts with wedding updates, each message somehow managing to include a subtle dig. "We've decided on a sunset ceremony because Michael says I look radiant in golden light, unlike some people who look washed out." The venue is Riverstone Estate, so elegant and exclusive, not everyone can appreciate that level of sophistication. My bridesmaids are my true sisters, the family you choose rather than the one you're stuck with. I responded with brief congratulations and ignored the subtext, assuming this was standard Ashley drama that would fade after the wedding. What I failed to recognize was how much my distance had allowed her to construct an alternate reality. To Michael, to his family, to the carefully selected wedding guests, Ashley had painted a very specific picture of her background and her relationships. She was a woman of taste and refinement, someone who'd overcome family dysfunction to build a beautiful life. Her older sister, the rarely mentioned Jennifer, was a cautionary tale. Jealous, bitter, career-obsessed to the point of isolation, someone who'd rejected family warmth for cold ambition. Ashley had learned that controlling the narrative meant controlling perception, and she'd spent 2 years carefully crafting a story where she was the heroine overcoming a difficult family, not the entitled younger sister resenting someone else's success. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The wedding invitation arrived 6 weeks before the event, expensive cardstock with raised lettering that probably cost more per piece than most people spent on dinner. Ashley Martinez and Michael Thompson request the honor of your presence, it read, followed by details about the Riverstone Estate ceremony and black tie reception. At the bottom, a handwritten note in Ashley's looping script. Jen, I know we've had our differences, but you're still my sister. It would mean everything to have you there. Let's start fresh. I stared at that note for a long time, searching for the angle. Ashley didn't do sincerity without calculation. But our mother had been calling weekly with increasingly pointed reminders about family obligation, about how Ashley was really trying to mend fences, about how attending would mean so much. Bob had even gotten on the phone during one call, his voice heavy with judgment. Your sister is extending an olive branch. The least you could do is show up for one day. Prove you're not as selfish as people think. That last part stung more than I wanted to admit. I knew how they talked about me when I wasn't around. The daughter who thought she was too good for her family, too important to make time, too successful to remember where she came from. Never mind that I'd helped pay for Ashley's car when she totaled her street racing. Never mind that I'd covered Mom and Bob's property taxes 2 years running when Bob's hours got cut. Never mind that every family crisis somehow required my checkbook even as they criticized my priorities. I RSVP'd yes, marking one guest, and ordered a generous gift from their registry. A set of all-clad cookware that cost $800, the kind of thing Ashley would photograph for Instagram but probably never use. I bought a new dress for the occasion, slate blue silk that was elegant without trying to compete with the bridal party, and arranged to leave work early that Friday to make the drive to Riverstone Estate. Diana Patel, my best friend and TechVision's vice president of marketing, raised her eyebrows when I mentioned the wedding during our weekly coffee meeting. You're actually going? After everything you've told me about your sister? Diana had heard enough stories over the years to understand the family dynamics, the constant taking disguised as need, the resentment masquerading as concern. It's one day, I said, stirring my latte with more force than necessary. I show up, smile through the ceremony, eat overpriced food, give my gift, and maintain family peace for another year. Small price to pay for my mother to stop calling every other day with guilt trips. Just promise me you'll leave the moment anything feels off, Diana said, her dark eyes serious. Your family has a way of turning celebrations into ambushes. Remember your birthday dinner 3 years ago? I did remember. The surprise party Ashley had insisted on throwing that turned into an intervention about my single status and workaholic tendencies, complete with a slideshow of happy couples and statistics about fertility declining after 35. I'd left before dessert and didn't speak to any of them for 6 months. This is different, I assured Diana, wanting to believe it myself. It's Ashley's day. She'll be too focused on being the center of attention to worry about me. The morning of the wedding, I woke early in my loft and went through my usual routine. Coffee from beans I ground myself, reading the news while looking out at the river, a run along the waterfront that cleared my head and reminded me why I loved this city. I returned to shower and dress with care, applying makeup that enhanced without overwhelming, pulling my dark hair into a sleek low bun that felt professional and polished. The blue silk dress fit perfectly, sophisticated enough for a black tie event without trying to steal focus. I drove to Riverstone Estate alone, my gift elegantly wrapped in the passenger seat, arriving exactly 15 minutes before the ceremony as etiquette dictated. The venue was stunning, exactly the kind of place Ashley would choose. Rolling vineyards stretched in every direction, the main house a restored manor with manicured gardens and a ceremony space overlooking the valley. Luxury cars filled the parking area, and guests in designer attire clustered in small groups, champagne flutes already in hand despite the early hour. I didn't recognize most of the guests, which made sense. Ashley's life had always been populated by acquaintances she elevated to best friend status for as long as they served a purpose. I nodded politely at strangers and found my seat for the ceremony, noting with some surprise that I'd been placed in the back row, far from the family section where our mother and Bob sat prominently in the second row. Extended family and close friends typically occupied the first several rows. The back was usually reserved for co-workers, distant relatives, or obligatory invitations. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way expensive weddings always are. Ashley looked radiant coming down the aisle, her gown a confection of lace and silk that probably cost more than my first car. Michael stood at the altar looking genuinely moved, his eyes bright as he watched his bride approach. For a moment, I felt something almost like happiness for her. Maybe this was real. Maybe Michael was different. Maybe she'd finally found something she wouldn't sabotage. The officiant spoke about love and partnership, about choosing each other every day, about the joining of two families. Ashley and Michael exchanged vows she'd clearly written herself, full of poetic language about soulmates and destiny and overcoming adversity to find each other. She didn't mention family once, I noticed. Her vows were entirely about Michael saving her from loneliness, completing her, giving her the life she'd always deserved. When they kissed and turned to face the audience as husband and wife, the applause was enthusiastic. I clapped politely, already mentally counting the hours until I could reasonably leave. Cocktail hour, dinner, a few dances, maybe 2 hours total before I could slip away without causing offense. The cocktail hour unfolded on the terrace, servers circulating with champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. I accepted a glass and positioned myself near the edge of the crowd, making small talk with an elderly couple who turned out to be Michael's grandparents. They were kind people, clearly delighted by the wedding, asking polite questions about how I knew the couple. "I'm Ashley's sister," I said, watching their expressions carefully. "Oh," Michael's grandmother said, her smile freezing slightly. "How lovely. Ashley mentioned she had a sister, but we'd understood you were unable to attend. She said something about work commitments overseas." The words hung in the air between us, confirming what I'd begun to suspect. Ashley had told people I wouldn't be here. She'd constructed a narrative where my absence was expected, perhaps even preferable. Yet here I stood, very much present, disrupting whatever story she'd carefully crafted. Michael's grandmother recovered quickly, her social graces smoothing over the awkwardness, but I caught the glance she exchanged with her husband. Confusion mixed with something else. Concern perhaps, or reassessment. I excused myself and moved through the crowd, observing with growing unease. Groups of guests chatted animatedly, but when I approached, conversations would pause. Smiles would tighten. People would find reasons to drift toward other clusters. It wasn't overt rudeness, nothing I could point to and name, but the cumulative effect was clear. I was not welcome here. More accurately, my presence was unexpected and unwanted in a way that suggested preparation, as if guests had been primed to respond to me in a specific manner. Near the bar, I overheard two women I didn't recognize discussing the bride. "Ashley's been through so much with her family," one said, her voice pitched low but not quite low enough. "Her sister especially. Imagine being that jealous of your own sibling's happiness. Some people just can't handle other people's success." I moved away before they could notice me, my champagne suddenly tasting bitter. The pieces were assembling into a picture I should have anticipated. Ashley hadn't just failed to mention me accurately. She'd weaponized my absence from her life, turning my distance into evidence of character flaws, my success into proof of coldness. To these people, I wasn't the sister who'd built a career through determination. I was the cautionary tale Ashley had overcome, the jealous older sibling too bitter to celebrate her sister's joy. When the reception doors opened, I followed the crowd into the ballroom, a soaring space with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the vineyard. Round tables draped in champagne-colored linens filled the room, each centerpiece a lavish arrangement of roses and peonies that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. A head table elevated on a platform dominated one end of the room, where the wedding party would sit in full view of everyone. Place cards directed guests to their assigned seats, names written in calligraphy on small frames beside each plate setting. I found my name at a table in the far back corner, positioned near the doors that led to the kitchen service area. The table wasn't completely isolated, but its placement was deliberate. Far from the head table, far from the family tables I could see clustered near the front, far from the prime seating that suggested importance or closeness. The other place cards at my table bore names I didn't recognize, and as guests filed in and found their seats, I noticed my tablemates were mostly older relatives who seemed confused about their distant placement and a few people who appeared to be last-minute additions, friends of friends who'd squeezed onto the guest list. "Is this table 7?" a woman asked, checking her card against the table number with visible disappointment. She'd clearly expected better placement. As the room filled, the acoustics shifted. The front tables buzzed with energy and laughter, champagne flowing as servers attended to every need. Our table in the back received less attention, servers passing by less frequently, the peripheral nature of our location becoming more apparent as the celebration intensified elsewhere. The meal service began with a flourish. Servers emerged from the kitchen bearing plates under silver domes, presenting each course with theatrical precision. The first course was a delicate butter lettuce salad with candied walnuts and goat cheese, dressed with a champagne vinaigrette. I watched as tables toward the front received their plates, the presentation immaculate. When our table was finally served, the salads looked slightly less composed, the lettuce a bit more wilted, as if ours had been plated first and left sitting while fresher versions went to priority tables. The second course was a lobster bisque, rich and aromatic, served in porcelain bowls with a swirl of cream and fresh herbs. Again, the front tables were served first, and by the time our table received the course, the soup had cooled considerably. The woman beside me, Michael's great-aunt apparently, frowned as she tasted hers. "It's nearly cold," she murmured to her husband. But it was the main course that crystallized the deliberate nature of our treatment. I watched as servers paraded through the ballroom with stunning presentations, filet mignon cooked to perfect medium rare, butter-poached lobster tail glistening beside it, truffle mashed potatoes and roasted asparagus arranged artfully on white porcelain. Each plate was a small masterpiece, the kind of meal that would photograph beautifully and taste even better. Table after table received these gorgeous plates, guests exclaiming over the quality and presentation. Then the servers reached our corner. The kitchen doors swung open, and different servers emerged, their trays holding plates that looked distinctly different. When mine was placed before me, the contrast was impossible to miss. Instead of the pristine white porcelain everyone else received, I had a standard banquet plate. The meat was chicken, not beef, and it had that telltale dried edge of something reheated rather than freshly prepared. The vegetables looked steamed rather than roasted, already going limp on the plate. There was no lobster, no truffle potatoes, no artistic arrangement. It looked like exactly what it was. Leftover food from another event, reheated and served as an afterthought. I stared at the plate, my mind initially refusing to process what I was seeing. This had to be a mistake. Some confusion in the kitchen, plates mixed up, an error that would be quickly corrected once I mentioned it to a server. But as I looked around my table, I saw similar plates before my tablemates. Not quite as obviously substandard as mine, but definitely inferior to what the rest of the room received. We'd been designated as lesser guests, worthy of lesser treatment. My great-aunt noticed at the same time. "Excuse me," she called to a passing server, her voice sharp with indignation. "I think there's been a mistake with our meals. Everyone else has steak and lobster." The server barely paused. "No mistake, ma'am. This table has the alternate menu selection." She moved on before anyone could ask what that meant or who had requested an alternate selection. Heat crept up my neck, a flush of humiliation I couldn't control. Around the ballroom, guests were enjoying their spectacular meals, laughing and toasting the happy couple. At our table, we sat with our obviously inferior food, marked as unimportant, unworthy of the same treatment as everyone else. The message was clear and cruel. We didn't matter. I picked up my fork, trying to maintain composure, trying to tell myself this was just incompetence or budget constraints, anything other than what I knew in my gut it actually was. Deliberate exclusion. Calculated disrespect. My sister, on the most important day of her life, had gone out of her way to ensure I knew my place. Not at the family table where I belonged. Not among the honored guests receiving proper service. But here, in the back corner, eating reheated leftovers while everyone else feasted. The chicken tasted like shame and anger, difficult to swallow past the tightness in my throat. I forced myself to eat a few bites, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me leave hungry or defeated. Conversations at my table had grown stilted, everyone aware that something was wrong but too polite or too uncertain to address it directly. Michael's great-aunt pushed her food around her plate, her lips pressed into a thin line of displeasure. Across the ballroom, I could see Ashley at the head table, radiant and laughing, feeding Michael a bite of her perfect steak. She hadn't looked in my direction once since the reception began. Bob and my mother sat at a table near the front, both with the premium meal, both carefully not looking toward my corner. They knew. Of course they knew. This level of orchestrated humiliation required planning, coordination, complicity from people who should have protected me instead of enabling my public degradation. The speeches began as dessert was served, and yes, our table received a different dessert as well. While the front tables got individual molten chocolate cakes with vanilla bean ice cream, we received what looked like sheet cake portions, the frosting already hardening at the edges. The best man spoke about Michael's loyalty and kindness. The maid of honor, Brittany, gushed about Ashley's beauty and grace, her ability to overcome obstacles and toxic relationships to find true love. That last part was delivered with a pointed glance toward the back of the room, toward me, making clear who the toxic relationship had been. I sat frozen, unable to leave without causing a scene, unable to stay without accepting this treatment as deserved. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from Diana. "How's it going? Surviving the family bonding?" I typed back with shaking hands. "It's worse than I imagined. Call you later." I couldn't explain here, couldn't find words for the specific cruelty of being served leftovers at your own sister's wedding while 200 guests witnessed your diminishment. The music shifted to something upbeat, signaling the beginning of the reception's social portion. The bride and groom would make their rounds, thanking guests for attending, accepting congratulations and well wishes. I watched Ashley and Michael stand from the head table, preparing to work the room in that choreographed way wedding couples do, starting with family and close friends before gradually reaching the outer circles. They moved through the front tables first, Ashley glowing with champagne and attention, Michael charming and gracious beside her. They spent long minutes at each table, posing for photos, embracing guests, laughing at toasts and jokes. Ashley's performance was flawless, the beautiful bride soaking up adoration, her hand constantly touching Michael's arm in that possessive way that declared ownership and victory. I considered leaving. Just standing up, walking out through those kitchen doors behind me, getting in my car and driving back to Portland and my quiet loft where nobody served me leftovers or orchestrated my humiliation. But something kept me seated. Stubbornness maybe, or curiosity about how much further this could go. I'd come this far. I might as well see the full scope of what Ashley had planned. They were 3 tables away now. 2 tables. Then they were approaching mine, Michael's best man trailing them with a photographer capturing every moment. I straightened in my seat, arranging my face into polite neutrality, prepared for whatever cutting remark Ashley had prepared for this encounter. Michael reached our table first, his professional smile firmly in place, probably exhausted from hours of being on, but maintaining the performance. He moved to thank Michael's great-aunt, bending to kiss her cheek, when his eyes swept across the table and landed on me. The change in his expression was immediate and total. His smile didn't just fade, it collapsed. Color drained from his face. His eyes widened with what looked like genuine shock, then confusion, then something approaching horror. He straightened abruptly, staring at me as if I'd materialized from thin air. "Ms. Martinez?" His voice came out strangled, uncertain. "What are you doing here?" The music seemed to recede. Conversations at nearby tables faltered as people turned to see what had caused the groom's strange reaction. Ashley's hand tightened on Michael's arm, her fingernails probably leaving marks through his tuxedo jacket. I could see panic flash across her carefully made-up face. "I'm sorry," Michael continued, his professional composure crumbling visibly. "I don't understand. Why is the senior vice president of operations sitting back here? There must be some terrible mistake." Senior vice president of operations. The words hung in the air, reshaping reality for everyone within earshot. Michael's great-aunt turned to stare at me with new eyes. The other guests at my table looked between Michael and me with growing comprehension. Across the ballroom, conversations were stopping as people tried to understand what was happening at the back corner table. "Michael," Ashley said, her voice tight and high. "Let's keep moving. We have so many guests to thank." But Michael wasn't moving. He was staring at me, then at the plate in front of me with its reheated chicken and wilted vegetables, then at the premium meals visible at other tables, then back at me. I watched him process the implications, watched his face shift from confusion to understanding to anger. "Ashley," he said quietly, dangerously. "Why is my boss sitting at table 7 eating different food than everyone else?" "Your boss?" Michael's great-aunt said, her voice sharp. "This is your boss?" But Ashley said her sister was overseas, that she couldn't make it, that they had a difficult relationship because of jealousy issues. Michael turned to Ashley, and I saw something die in his eyes. That moment when you realize the person you married is not who you thought they were. "Your sister? Ms. Martinez is your sister?" Ashley's composure was fracturing, her perfect bride facade cracking to reveal something desperate underneath. "Michael, this isn't the time. We'll discuss this later. Let's just finish greeting guests." "We'll discuss this now," Michael said, his voice carrying across the increasingly silent ballroom. "You told me your sister was bitter and jealous. You said she was a retail manager who resented your success. You said she probably wouldn't come because she couldn't handle seeing you happy." "She is bitter," Ashley tried, her voice shrinking under the weight of exposure. "She's always been jealous of me, of my happiness, of my relationships. Just because she has some corporate job doesn't mean she's not toxic and difficult." Michael's laugh was bitter and humorless. "Some corporate job?" "Ashley, she's the senior vice president of operations at TechVision Solutions. She's 3 levels above me. She's one of the most respected executives in the company. I've been in meetings where our CEO talks about her strategic vision like she's the future of the organization." He turned back to me, his face a mixture of mortification and fury. "Ms. Martinez, I am so profoundly sorry. I had no idea." "Ashley she never said." The photographer was still snapping pictures, capturing every moment of this unraveling. Guests throughout the ballroom were fully focused on our corner now, the spectacle of the groom confronting his bride at their own wedding too compelling to ignore. I could see Bob half standing at his table, my mother's hand on his arm trying to keep him seated. Ashley's maid of honor Brittany was filming on her phone, apparently unable to resist documenting the drama. I stood slowly, gathering my clutch, maintaining every ounce of dignity I could summon. "Michael, congratulations on your marriage. I hope you'll both be very happy." My voice was steady, professional, the same tone I used in boardrooms when delivering bad news to unprepared executives. "Ashley, thank you for inviting me. This has been extraordinarily illuminating." I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the only sound in a ballroom that had gone completely silent. Behind me, I heard Michael's voice, no longer quiet, no longer controlled. "Why would you do this? To your own sister? At our wedding?" I didn't stay to hear Ashley's answer. I pushed through the doors into the cool evening air, breathing deeply for the first time in hours. My hands were shaking, adrenaline and fury and something like relief coursing through me. The valet looked surprised to see a guest leaving so early, but he retrieved my car without question. As I drove away from Riverstone Estate, my phone began buzzing with texts. Diana. My CEO Richard Sullivan, who'd apparently been a guest and witnessed everything. Even a few colleagues I hadn't realized were there. But I didn't read them yet. I drove back to Portland in silence, watching the sun set over the valley, and thought about what came next. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Ashley had made a critical miscalculation. She'd humiliated me publicly, but she'd done it in front of my professional network, in front of people who knew exactly who I was and what I'd built. She'd tried to diminish me and instead revealed her own deceit to the man she'd just married. And unlike all the previous times when I'd absorbed family mistreatment in silence, this time there would be consequences. Tomorrow, I'd begin documenting everything. Tonight, I'd simply pour a glass of wine and stand at my loft windows overlooking the river, grateful that chosen family and earned respect mattered more than blood relations and unearned entitlement. Ashley wanted to play games with my reputation. She was about to learn that some people don't just get mad. They get strategic. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.